Welcome to our podcast. My name is Dave, and I'm a Christian pastor in Utah. I've been here for a couple decades now.
I'm Nate, and I as well have been a Christian pastor living here since 2002, and we're back with Carl Wimmer, who is also a Christian pastor at this point, but we're looking into your story, and in a previous episode, we kind of left it off with you being in a dark space.
Oh, yeah.
And kind of a crisis, not kind of, a definite crisis of faith, exploring some things that you'd never seen before, and coming to the realization that what you believed was on thin ice, rice paper. Now we're looking at a lot of the different things that you've seen as you look back.
Yeah.
You saw these moments where God was drawing you, and specifically drawing you to the person of Jesus. And so can we recount some of the things that you look back on and you go, I definitely see that now as a moment where God was drawing me to himself?
Yeah. Yeah. So, and I got to tell you that this is all hindsight, of course, because in the moment when the very foundations of your life are destroyed, when they're ripped apart, you're not looking back, introspectively on what God has done to draw you where you are. You're at this moment wondering if God even exists,
right?
And that's one thing that it was just being very real here. I very, very much remember early of 2013. We're talking January-ish, and I told you I'd gone back to law enforcement, and I was sitting on the side of the road and just wrecked as a human being because everything that I had been taught to believe had collapsed. Everything that I thought was true, everything that I knew was true, everything that I was fighting for and willing to die for, everything that I had taught my children had collapsed. And that inevitably led to a place of atheism. It led to a place where I didn't even know if God existed, to where if God doesn't exist, then we really are simply accidents of nature. And there is the natural conclusion that I came to was that there is no purpose to life. And I remember specifically sitting there thinking that within arm's reach of me, I had 3 guns. I had a handgun on my hip, had an AR-15 right in front of me, and a shotgun right behind me. And I thought of how easy it would have been to have ended it all. Very selfishly, of course.
Mm-hmm.
The darkness of where I was blinded everything. And, of course I didn't, obviously. But to say that wasn't a real thought, I'd be lying because I was in such a dark place. Now,
Can I reframe something here for our viewers and listeners? You talk about being in this dark place where the conclusion is God doesn't exist. But you also, in the last episode, talked about kind of having this place where you were on your face, sobbing, crying out to God. How do those things coexist, and kind of what order did they come in so we can understand that part of the story?
So the on my face crying out to God to reveal truth to me would have been before the darkest moments of suicide, because of thoughts of suicide and complete depression and desolation in my mind, because I was so sure that the LDS Church and everything that I'd been taught was true, and everything that I was learning was absolutely contrary to that, contradicting that. One thing after another, dozens upon dozens, more than 100 things I told you last time that I had documented that were unexplainable. You would have had to just completely disregard any respect for truth in order to keep believing. And I was praying, and during that whole time is when I was on my face begging God to reveal truth to me, show me truth. And what I, in my own mind, thought that meant was show me that the LDS Church is true. Please reaffirm my faith so I can just get out of this and move on. When that didn't happen, I lost faith in God's existence. Okay. Jumping now to today, we'll get to the part where I come to know the Lord, but looking back on all of this, it's amazing how you look back on your life and you can just see where God was at work the entire time. little nuggets, little things that he planted, the most significant of which was Christian music, and which we'll talk about in a minute. But very early on, I had different interactions with Christians. I, as a police officer in a bigger city, before this ever happened, before I ever ran for politics, I was involved in a really violent situation, and one that would bother anybody. It was not good, and I was up. I was up like 3 a.m. walking at a park, and I got out of bed and went for a walk. And I remember that the police department I worked for had not pastor, but they had a chaplaincy program, and all of the chaplains happened to be evangelical Christians. They were pastors, and they would volunteer their time to do this chaplaincy program for the police department. And I thought, I'm going to text one of them. And I sent a text at 3 a.m. And what I said was, in the morning when you wake up, give me a call. I'm struggling, And he knew what had happened. Everybody kind of knew. And my phone rings, and it's him. And he says, "Where are you?" And I said, "I'm at such and such park." And he says, "Stay there. I'll be right there." 3 a.m. I'm like, this is unbelievable. I'm like, okay. So I just sat down, waited for him. I sat out on the curb and waited for him. And he pulled up about 15 minutes later, sleep still in his eyes. I think he's still wearing his pajama pants. But, he sits there and talks to me and prays with me. And I do think that's probably one of the first times I've ever heard an evangelical pray. And I'm like, this guy is talking to God. And that was significant to me. Left a massive impact in my life. Several other things. As a powerlifter, as someone who is in the heat of competing in powerlifting, there was this Christian, I think they're still around, but there's this Christian group called the Power Team.
Oh, yeah.
That they put on feats of strength, and they give an evangelistic message. And they were at Layton Christian Church. Layton Christian Academy is the school, but the church there in Layton, and me and my brother-in-law, my wife's brother, my friend, who's also he was a nationally ranked national champion powerlifter. We're like, let's go watch these guys, and so we went to this church, and more interested in the feats of strength than we were their message. But the message was super exciting, and that night I was so stoked, and I was telling my wife, I'm like, man, I need to start like a power team for Mormons. We'd call them the Pioneers or something. Yeah. I can break bats. I can do and they had a guy out there that came out and did bench press, and it was impressive, but I'm like, yeah, I can bench press more than this guy, He's the second strongest guy in this room today. And that's hilarious. And I could do everything they're doing. I could give a message about more, the LDS church, And I just thought it'd be kind of exciting. Anyway, that was impactful. One time we were on a trip. We were on vacation in California, and we're at the beach, and these Christians come down to the beach, and they're doing baptisms in the ocean.
Okay.
And I was just enthralled. I get up and I walk to the edge of the water. I'm just watching, and I'm watching the joy that they have, and it was so irreverent for an LDS person because they were cheering, right? You don't cheer. When someone's done singing in church, you just sit there. You don't applaud. You don't do, right. But they were cheering and high-fiving each other and hugging and crying. And there's so much joy. And as they're walking by, I'm like, hey, congratulations. And I'm like, what am I doing? I'm Elders Quorum president. Why am I congratulating them and being in a false religion, But it impacted me. Over the period of time, the most significant thing that impacted us was Christian music. My wife and I, for probably 10 years prior to this crisis of faith, had listened to Christian music on K-Love Radio. We would go to Christian concerts. I still remember our very, very first Christian concert we ever went to, long time ago, was at the Utah State Fairgrounds, because the Utah State Fair would bring in a Christian artist. At least one, every single time the fair was there'd be a Christian artist.
Okay.
I'm not sure how that happened, but every year there'd be they'd have lots of musicians and bands, and there'd always be a Christian artist. And Audio Adrenaline, the old Audio Adrenaline with the feller that was losing his voice, was the headliner. And so we that's our first concert ever. And
can I stop you right there and ask you, like, how common do you feel like that was within the LDS paradigm? Like, do a lot of people do that? Or
I think a lot more now than did.
Okay.
I felt like we were the only ones. And the only reason I say that, I mean,
was it frowned upon to do that, or just part of free agency? You could or you couldn't. I don't know.
I don't think it was frowned upon, but I don't think that it was encouraged.
Okay.
It was certainly never encouraged to go to another church. And since it was kind of like a church because they would always give a gospel message and along with the music, you know, we always felt like it wasn't something that we talked about a whole lot, but we did a lot. So we did that a lot. And the reason I think that we were the only ones, you always felt like you were under a microscope, like everyone was looking at you. Only because, you know, the Christians were there with their hands in the air and we were sitting there like this. And I had my white shirt and tie and I'm like, you know, and such a funny story about that exact thing. I got to remember to pass it on. It's so funny. But
So I just want to interject here, like blast from the past, Audio Adrenaline. Like when I was a young guy early in ministry, like youth group, like we would do our Christian youth group and like we would go to Audio Adrenaline concerts. And so when you said the first Christian band you ever heard was Audio Adrenaline, I'm like, that seems like a real stretch for a Mormon person to do that. But I thought it was also kind of cool because like that's what we used to use in our youth group and our children's ministry and all kinds of stuff. So Audio Adrenaline, they're awesome. They're still awesome today. So
yeah.
Anyways,
well, there was the one thing that really did for us going through different, you know, going through the years, going to different bands, and we went to Mercy Me at the fairgrounds.
Right.
We went to a concert where. Some of the not real big anymore, but Todd Agnew, who was always one of my wife's favorites, his voice is just amazing. He was the headliner, and the opener for him was a band named Big Daddy Weave, who is far more popular nowadays. Big Daddy Weave's massive, but they were the openers for Todd Agnew.
Okay,
and the two things we learned at Christian concerts over the years was one, the thing that my wife learned that blew her mind, especially after the Todd Agnew concert, was that you could, quote, feel the Spirit outside of the LDS context, okay? Because, and what that means is within LDS culture and context, feeling drives everything.
Okay.
Feeling is how you determine truth. It's how you determine faults. And ultimately, it's just warm feelings. It's the feelings of love, compassion, acceptance. It's just good feelings, right? Yeah. Feelings of seeing an old friend and giving them a hug, okay? That feeling would be considered a feeling of the Spirit, the Holy Spirit.
Okay.
She always believed, and I think a lot of people tend to believe, that you can only have the Spirit with you or feel the Spirit within the confines and context of the LDS Church. And so she was overwhelmed with emotion at the Todd Agnew concert that we went to with his beautiful music and with his beautiful words and everything that he was saying. And she's like, I did not know you could do that. I did not know you could feel the Spirit in that outside of the temple or outside of the LDS context.
Okay.
The second thing it did for us was we started to realize, at least for me and within my sphere of people, we always thought that everybody was always talking about people within the LDS church. That you always think everybody on Sunday, like the Christian churches are always talking about the Mormons. That's what you think. Okay. And you think, and then you go to these Christian concerts, and it's never mentioned. Nothing about nothing. I mean, it's so about Jesus and the gospel, and it's like, you know, it's not like they say it is. You know,
okay.
It's not like they say it is. They're not talking about us. It's not all about us. It's actually all about Jesus. Those are the two things that we realized in probably 10, maybe 12 years ago into concerts.
Interesting.
Before my crisis of faith.
Okay.
So,
and then also a part of this is a story when you were a politician meeting with a pastor.
Yeah.
That became an incredible influence at some
yes.
point. Yeah.
So I was still in the legislature and I was running for re-election in the House of Representatives. And in my district, out in the Harriman, Riverton, South Jordan area, there was a beautiful family. And Julie and Andy, great family. And they volunteered on my campaign. They really liked my pro-life position and stance and the things I was doing for families. And so they volunteered on my re-election campaign. And they were evangelical Christians. And they invited me to church. They invited me to attend their church. And I rebuffed the idea a few times. Then we went to a concert together as family. We went to a few concerts together. You know, they were going to concerts. We'd go together. They finally invited me, and by this time I had the idea that I may want to run for Congress someday.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, I'm going. I'm going to go to their church because I saw it as a political maneuver to get a foot in the door with evangelicals.
Interesting.
Okay.
And so I went with them to Lifeline Community Church, Pastor Brian Hurlbutt. And I sat down, I totally went there just wanting to meet people, introduce myself. I'm Carl Wimmer, politician. Watch for my name in a few years. I'm running for Congress. You know, I wanted in with these people.
Yeah.
And then we sat down and the service began and they played music that I kind of recognized because it was Christian music.
Sure.
And then Brian got up and taught for 45 minutes on 2 verses. And I'm like, what was that? I had never in my entire life seen such depth of knowledge about God and about the Bible.
Okay.
And my jaw just hit the ground like, this is the most remarkable thing I have ever seen.
Really?
Yeah. There is just not that depth ever in my history. Everything's a mile wide and a half-inch deep. This was 5 miles deep and an inch wide. It was unbelievable.
Okay.
And I became friends with Brian, Pastor Hurlbutt, and his wife, Jennifer, and they played a very, very significant role during my crisis of faith. Brian, he poured into me and did just a really, really patient, good man. And the thing is that he never, even when, you know, I saw and we would talk, and one time it was in the legislature, the representatives get a turn to lead the prayer and the pledge each morning. Mm-hmm. When it was my turn, I had Brian come up and offer the prayer. Really? Yeah, just as a token of, you know, pat the evangelical on the head and show him how diverse I am, you know. I invited him to be a part of a group called the Utah Family Action Council, which I was the chairman of this council, and it was 15 Mormons and Brian, who kind of tried to do family valued legislation, and he knew he was the token Christian who was invited, but he was kind and generous the whole time, and I just
he's sharp. Like, he's got, I mean, I've been around Brian, like, he's got a lot of wisdom. He's got a lot of, and he's incredibly well-spoken, like, in a way that it's impressive.
Yes. Yeah. If you go to lunch at McDonald's with him, just a casual lunch to talk football, you have to take a thesaurus. Yeah. He has more going on between his ears than any 2 people I know. And I just love him. I love him. And he taught me a new word, which I use all the time now, during this whole process, which the word epistemology, which I studied and learned a lot about epistemology, but it's how we know what we know. And he just took me by the hand and said, why do you know what you know? Why did you know what you knew? Was it grounded in fact, or was it grounded in your subjective feeling? And if you met someone who had this that they believed their religion was 100% true with every fiber of their being, and you did too, but it was both grounded in that feeling, that confirmational spirit, how do you convince the other one they're wrong? You want them to be LDS and come to your faith, but how do you convince the Jehovah's Witness that they're wrong and they need to come to the LDS church, the one true church? And it just, he walked me through these things, and it was really, really good. It was a good thing, but he was very significant in my process, in this process. of atheism, doubt, questioning, and this crisis of faith that I was experiencing.
So you're starting to talk to Brian. You're in the middle of your dark place, right?
Yes.
You're like questioning God, questioning all this stuff, but you saw this like gleam of hope in like, this guy knows what he believes and he knows it deeply. And were you drawn to that? Like you wanted that too at that point, or were you just still trying to convince yourself that you had made a mistake or something? What was your mind going there?
The day I attended his church, I was still fully LDS, fully believer, and I would be for several more years after that. And so I thought, this guy is very, very knowledgeable about a lot of stuff. He's just knowledgeable about things that are probably not 100% accurate. You know, he's not. He's got some. The way that I would have described it is, he has some light and some knowledge, but he doesn't have the fullness of the gospel.
Okay. All right.
Later on, I can't even explain why I ultimately reached out to him. It may have been just a last ditch thing, but it was interesting. I was talking to him a few months ago, and he still has the email I sent him. I sent him an email begging for help. And he read it to me, and I'm like, I remember that now, but I didn't remember it until he read it back to me. And it just said, imagine everything that you were taught to believe, everything that you loved, everything you lived for, everything that you taught your kids fell apart and wasn't true.
Yeah.
Imagine that happening to you. And that's where I am. And I can't remember. I asked to meet with them, or he reached out and said, let's get together. And we did. We got together on Super Bowl Sunday of 2013.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
He met me at his church Super Bowl Sunday 2013. I'll never forget that, because that's a pretty significant sacrifice for a pastor, because I'm learning now pastors are overwhelmed, and sometimes they don't have boundaries, and I should not have asked him to meet me on Super Bowl Sunday. But he did.
Because many of us like football and sports.
Yeah,
and
that's
things
right.
like that.
That's true too.
Just like everybody else.
That's right. And we had a great conversation, but I didn't leave there changed. I mean, it was a great conversation with incredible things to think about, but I didn't leave there changed.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
Yeah.
So let's go to the change.
Yeah.
So you've been enjoying Christian music for a decade or so. When a Christian band comes into town, you show up at their concert, you go on the state fair, the bands that are coming in.
Yeah.
You go to the Todd Agnew, that concert, something there starts stirring in you or in
My
Sherry,
wife,
in your wife, right?
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about that for just 1 second before we get into the next one. But what was stirring in her heart at the Todd Agnew concert?
Well, why the guy is not more popular than he is, it blows my mind, because he puts on a phenomenal concert.
Okay.
Not only his music, but the way he interweaves the Bible with his music.
Yeah, he's a great guy.
He interweaves a brilliant gospel message with his music, and then he belts it out like nobody's business. And it was just that combination of things that just touched my wife's heart incredibly. And she's like, it's just that God was very real to her in that moment. And we were still very active LDS. I mean, I think we probably went to the temple that week, you know?
Okay.
So my wife at this time, she's doing research. She's doing her own research. Whilst I have lost my faith, she doesn't know what to think. She's doing her own research. And at this point, she is getting to the point where she can no longer hang on to the LDS faith either.
Okay.
She just can't.
Wow.
But we didn't know what to do. And she certainly was not ready to go down the path I was down. She was not ready.
Atheist,
right.
agnostic.
She was not ready to go down the path of hating a non-existing God.
Right. Yes.
She wasn't ready for that.
Which is the perfect descriptor for modern atheism.
Right. Exactly.
As opposed to it being completely philosophical. It's more of if this is how God is, I don't want to be a part of him.
Right. Exactly. And I tried to protect my kids from that. I did. I would only make the occasional snarky remark at the dinner table during the dinner prayer. Like, well, let's bless our greasy pizza that don't give us a heart attack, What that'll nourish and strengthen our bodies. It's pizza, people. We ask for extra cheese,
We don't want this blessed to our bodies.
I would only make snarky remarks occasionally. I tried to protect my kids from the absolute devastation that was going on inside of my mind and my head and my heart.
Okay, so now she's in the middle of this.
Yeah.
I don't know how long after that you went to another concert, Rock and Road Show, was it? It was called the Rock and Road Show.
The Rock and Worship Road Show.
Rock and Worship Road Show. That sounds very Christian.
It was a $10 concert or a free concert. I think it was $10 if you wanted to sit closer. It was either free or $10.
Okay.
Wow.
But it was massive. It was a massive concert. And we knew we were going before this crisis of faith because we knew it was coming months in advance. And all the headliners were there, okay? And I knew it was coming, and my kids were kind of excited. And it was the last, really, I didn't want to do it. I put on a show, like, yay. I didn't want to go.
Because at this point, the whole Christian thing was like
a
farce too.
Everything within the LDS church had fallen apart. I believed nothing about it. My faith had completely deconstructed and fallen like a house of cards. And why in the world would... Well, this is the second part of my story. This happens after I come to know the Lord. But bottom line is, why would I ever believe the Bible? Right?
Okay.
I mean, Christians rely only on the Bible. And the Bible is the least respected of the 4 primary works in the LDS doctrine.
Mm-hmm.
And so I never even considered to rely on the Bible or rely on the tenets of a church that is already wrong, the tenets of a church that has a little bit of light, but not the fullness of the gospel. Well, if this church that has the fullness of the gospel just collapsed with everything that I was trying to defend it and hold it together, but it was like holding wet noodles. Why would the one that only has a little bit of light knowledge, why would that even be attractive to me? So
yeah.
Do you feel like a lot of people, though, as they're in crisis of faith, because a lot of our viewers and listeners are probably, in a crisis of faith at some point, do you feel like a lot of them feel the same way about Christianity in general?
I do. I think that I want to be very gentle and kind here. But one of the tenets of the LDS Church is that we believe the Bible to be the Word of God as far as it's translated correctly. We believe the Book of Mormon to be the Word of God. What that automatically does, no matter who you are, is it puts up a subconscious filter that everything in the Bible could be corrupted, could be wrong. And so it is the last thing that you'll rely on. And I think in most cases, that's why the overwhelming majority of people who leave the LDS Church go the route I went at the first, which is atheism. They just lose complete faith in everything because honestly, you don't even know the difference between a Bible story and a Book of Mormon story. Okay, Jonah in the whale, is that Book of Mormon or is that Bible? I mean, you just don't know. I mean, it's all kind of meshed together. And I remember my wife, as we're going down this new road, walking with Jesus, she's like, okay, now Daniel's in the lion den. No, that's in the book of Daniel. That's Bible, know. But there was so much unwiring and so much because it's all kind of meshed together. And so it collapses together because truth, in the LDS culture, truth is attached to the church and the church is attached to truth. And if the LDS Church collapses in your worldview, if it collapses, then everything goes with it, including Jesus, God, the Bible. The Bible's gone. And it all collapses.
Wow.
And so why would you hold on to anything? And that's where I was.
Okay. So you're there.
So I begrudgingly go down Salt Lake City, February 22nd, 2013. Begrudgingly go. Great concert, fine, yay, it was good. And then I think Mercy Me was the headliner, but they may have been co-headliners. But then Jeremy Camp comes out, and I had never. Sure, Jeremy Camp's great. Some of his stuff's great.
Yeah.
I mean, but I had never significantly thought much about him until that day. In what can only be described as an overwhelming supernatural moment. Jeremy's singing, great voice, but he puts his guitar down and he opens up this little Bible. He has this Bible up there and he starts preaching from the Bible and talking about grace, talking about Jesus, what he did for us, what he did for you, what he did for me. And in that very moment, it was as if the entire building of 20,000 people, however many was there, 15,000 people had disappeared. And Jeremy was talking to me.
Wow.
And I'm like, what? This is very unusual. And in that moment, Jesus introduced himself to me. And I walked out of that building that night a completely different person.
Wow.
Incredible.
I walked in there as one man. I walked out a completely different creation.
Wow.
I have never been the same.
You weren't even looking for that.
No.
That's
I didn't go there seeking it. No.
You were there with a grumpy attitude, basically.
I was there with a grumpy attitude. But when that happened, I started kind of just like now. It's such an emotional experience. I'm kind of teary-eyed, and I turned. Andy Bird was sitting kind of to the left of me, and I'm like, I think I've just been born again. And he just starts bawling and grabs me and hugs me. And it was the most surreal experience of my life. I didn't know how to even wrap my head around what had happened.
Okay.
I'm like, wow, okay, God. I think I get finally why it appears that you've wrecked my life for so long now. Because you brought me down to where I had nothing but to seek you. And it had to be that way for me to know it was God.
This is kind of your Damascus Road experience. And for those of our viewers who don't know that passage in the book of Acts, a guy by the name of Saul meets Jesus on the road to Damascus and is utterly just struck by his goodness and his grace. And wasn't looking for it. Like, this guy was on the hunt to persecute the church, the Christian church at the time that was starting to spread through the Roman world. And he's like, I'm going to go and make sure that I put an end to this. And Jesus meets him on the road to Damascus. Like, you're going to this concert going, he doesn't even want to be there. And Jesus speaks to you through Jeremy Camp's message.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
It's incredible.
100%. It is incredible. And I would love, well, it is a happy ending. The entire thing is amazing at this point on. It was so loud, I couldn't tell my wife what had happened. I was so at that point worshiping and just so excited. And we walk out of there, we go get in the truck. I'm like, guys, babe, did you feel that? Did you see it? She's like, that was a good concert. I'm like, no. God, did you experience like God right there? I mean, and she had not had that experience, but I'm like, it was unreal. It was unbelievable. And even as I talk about it now, 9 years later, almost 10 years later, the feelings of that night and the experience, it comes back to me. And I knew two things had to happen. One is I needed to learn. I had a whole lot of learning to do. And I think I texted Brian that night.
Okay.
And said, what Bible do you recommend? Like, what should I do? I want to learn. and he recommended ESV study Bibles.
Okay.
He said they got great footnotes and this and that. And this is the Bible I went out and bought that week. Oh, sorry.
With all your notes.
Yeah. This is the Bible I went out and bought that week. And I bought one for my wife.
This is an ESV study Bible?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And you can see I've studied it very thoroughly now.
ESV stands for the English Standard Version of the Bible.
Yeah. And boy, that is one of the early recommendations I give to anyone who is, in a crisis of faith, anyone who may be struggling, whatever the case may be. I always recommend get an NIV or an ESV or an NASB, any of the good modern standard English Bibles, because they're so much easier to understand. King James is an accurate Bible. It's a wonderful Bible, but it's written in language from the 1600s, and it's difficult for the average person living in 2022 to understand the whithertos and the therefores and the hithertoeths. And so when you put it into more modern language, it's easier to understand. So I highly recommend it.
I always tell people, look, 10th grade, 11th grade English, we had to do Shakespeare. We had to do Romeo and Juliet.
Yep.
I can't remember all the different Shakespeare stuff we did. I would not have passed without Cliff Notes.
Yeah, right.
Like, there's no way. I would read
What
this stuff.
are they talking
I was like,
about?
what are they talking about? And the King James Version isn't a whole lot different than that.
No,
It's
very much. very similar.
it's hard to work through.
It's stilted English that was used in the theater and
Yeah.
and of the time and
Very, very good Bible, very accurate Bible. No real concerns with the King James Bible at all. But it will change your perspective getting one that you can actually understand. And so that's one thing I did. And I wanted to learn.
Mm-hmm.
But you got to understand, I was on the verge of wanting to die.
yeah.
And so in the midst of this overwhelming, real metaphysical change that happened inside of me,
Yeah.
my brain is saying, I will never, ever, ever go through that again.
Okay.
And so at that point, the most important thing in my life became truth.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't idolize truth, but I'm telling you, it became the premier, most important thing in my life is truth. And I said, okay, I know what happened to me. It's okay, but I have one last thing I have to do, and I've got to do it honestly and with sincere, full intent. And that is, I have to test the Bible.
Right. Which makes perfect sense, because if this is the one scripture that, is, we only know it fits true as far as it's translated correctly.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you have this incredible faith experience at a concert. You don't automatically go to, I just completely trust the Bible.
Not at all. Not at all. And the fact is, during my deconstruction of my faith, it was the only of what the LDS Church calls the 4 standard works. It's the only one of the 4 that I did not viciously investigate.
Okay.
It's the only one, because it was irrelevant to me. Because if the Book of Mormon wasn't true, then the Bible sure isn't true.
Okay.
Okay.
Wow.
Yeah. So starting February 22nd, the day after that, I began to attack the Bible as viciously as I possibly could. I wanted to prove it incorrect, because in my heart, I was super excited about what happened February 22nd. I met God. I was born again. I knew that something had happened, but I'm not going to be fooled again. I will never go through that. Yeah. And so I'm like, all right, Bible, I'm coming at you. And I thought, honestly, in my own mind, that it was going to be a simple task to tear it apart. I really did. I thought this is going to be intellectually the easiest of everything I have done. And for the last 10 years, I'm still on the quest to disprove the Bible. It has taken everything that I have thrown at it, and it says, give me more. It has stood like an anvil of truth as I hammered on it and pounded on it, and it just laughs at my attempts to disprove it, to discredit it, to show that it's been changed and altered, and it mocked my attempts. And that one thing was probably the most shocking thing that happened to me in my journey, except for the night I met Jesus. The second most shocking thing that happened to me was when I come to realize that everything I thought I knew about the Bible was false. It had not been, the plain and precious truths have never been removed. It is the very Word of God. It can be relied upon as the Word of God. It is truth. And that blew my mind because I never expected that.
Okay.
I never expected that.
So growing up Latter-day Saint, being a leader in the church, did you ever read the Bible then?
Okay. All right. I don't feel so bad anymore because just a couple weeks ago, I saw a statistic of a poll that just came out that showed that the absolute overwhelming, we're talking like over 90% of active LDS people have never even read the Book of Mormon cover to cover.
Really?
Yeah. That's a statistic that I just read it a week or so ago.
Okay. All right.
Well, I had, of course, as I had, okay? But, and every single year, the LDS Church goes through a different one of the 4 standard works, okay, in their Sunday school or gospel doctrine classes. Yeah. And so this year's the Old Testament.
Yeah.
Okay. It's like I'm trying to be very generous here, but it's very similar to a very selective survey of the book. There's very little depth, very, very little depth, and you skip entire books. Like, I don't think I ever read and it makes sense to me now. I don't think I ever read the book of Galatians.
Okay.
And it makes sense to me now because the book of Galatians condemns a works-based theology. From beginning to end, Paul calls the people of Galatians foolish for wanting to go back to a works-based theology. Romans 8, which is the inner sanctuary of the tabernacle of the New Testament, was non-existent to me. I don't remember. If you look at my Bible now and compare it to the Bible I had when I was LDS, I may have had John 3:16 highlighted in my King James version of my quad. We call it a quad. It's all 4 of them. And now there is not a book anywhere from Old Testament to New Testament, including Zechariah, Haggai, and Micah, that does not have highlights and notes in the margins.
I can attest to that. I'm looking at all the highlights. I'm like, how do you know what's the difference between pink and yellow and all that stuff? But it's great.
It means something to me. And there's Romans 8 right there. So, I mean,
it's all highlighted.
It's a rainbow, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, your question is, did I ever read the Bible as a Mormon? I studied what they taught me.
Okay. Yeah.
I studied what they taught me.
Okay.
So,
but it was a very incomplete and
very, very incomplete and not deep.
And a general
and very
overview.
Generalized. General overview survey. Yes.
So I'm interested. You're investigating the Bible. You've got this dichotomy going on between I have this experience at a Christian concert.
Yeah.
And you've got this I've got to test the Bible, and I'm really wanting to prove it false, which I think a lot of people go, how do you live in that first? Because that's an incredibly, like, on some level, you must have believed that Jesus and God were at least spiritual beings, and maybe that the Bible wasn't a true testament of their existence.
I don't think that would be quite accurate.
Okay.
It would be that I fully, at that point, knew Jesus was Jesus. Yeah, 'cause I met him, right? I met him that night. He became so real to me, and there was some supernatural changes. It might not surprise you. You said that I was, planning from kindergarten on was alpha male.
Yeah.
Okay. Part of that was I was a very aggressive, very angry, like I would rage. I had struggles with anger and rage and aggressiveness.
Well, you're a boxer,
Power
lifter,
right?
All those things.
And so
follow suit.
I was a very aggressive person, and it took just a switch, a flip of a switch, to get me like, oh yeah, I'm going to knock this guy out, type situation, angry, like mad type, and that was supernaturally changed in me in a way that could not be denied. I didn't try to change that, but God changed my heart for people and changed my heart in that regard, to where I'm a little bit more of a teddy bear than I ever was for 38 years of my life. The way I'd categorize what you said, I knew Jesus existed, I knew God existed. The Bible may have some truth nuggets to it, but is it that important? Is it true? Is it not? And I'm going to go and I'm going to attack it like I did everything else. I had to for my own sanity.
Right.
But
because you didn't want to be fooled again.
That's right. But it was not easy. And anyone watching this, especially someone who maybe has completely deconstructed and they're an atheist, they'd be like, how do you really legitimately, if you think you had a God experience in February, how do you legitimately, objectively look at the Bible and try to disprove it because you now believe, right?
Yeah.
And they're correct. They're correct. I had to do everything I could to suspend as much as I could the experience I had on February 22nd and look at the Bible objectively. All I can tell you is I did as best as I could. I did as well as I could at aggressively attacking the Bible. I read Bart Ehrman. I consumed Bart Ehrman. Bart Ehrman is he is the leading critical scholar of the Bible.
Yeah.
Okay. He is a agnostic leaning atheist, and I did not shy away from reading his stuff. And I did not shy away from looking at the contradictions that he claimed were there. And one thing led to another in investigating that. And what it ultimately led to was that this is God's word. It can be relied upon, and I want to know it. And at the same time, I'm opened up to Jeremiah chapter 20.
Yeah.
Because this was highlighted, probably the first verse I highlighted in this Bible.
Really?
With little stars, yeah. Chapter 20, verse 9, because it so encapsulated how I felt after I was born again, which he says here, if I say I will not mention him or speak any more in his name, there is in my heart, as it were, a burning fire shut up in my bones, and I am weary with holding it in, and I cannot. The moment I left that concert, all I knew was I wanted to tell the entire freaking world about Jesus. And it was funny because a lot of my friends saw what I was posting on Facebook, and it was all about Jesus, and it's all about this and all about that. And people would send me private messages like, dude, what's wrong with you? Like, what's going on in your life? Like, you okay? I'm like, dude, I'm more than okay. Let me tell you about Jesus, and I'm more than okay. And I've never been more right in my life. And so there's these things going on at the same time, and paralleling that is my wife's study and research, because she didn't have that Damascus experience.
Right.
And she, to this day, cannot point to a day. I can point to a day, February 22nd, 2013, I met Jesus, okay? Born again. I celebrate it, and I think she's a little jealous of that. She doesn't need to be. No one needs to be. If they can't identify the day they were born again, it's fine. It's fine because some people are more methodical, and my wife's methodical. She's so much smarter than me, and she thinks things through, and she did research and thought things through, and I'll never forget. As I'm coming to understand the Bible's the Word of God, I come home from work and she's laying on the bed and she's got the Bible open and she's just reading and highlighting and taking notes. And she looks up at me as I walk in the room and she says, Jesus is God. I'm like, yeah. I'm like, are you in John 1:1, John 1:14? She's like, yeah. I know, isn't it crazy? He was with God. He was God, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. Yes, and she understood, and I knew at that moment she knew who Jesus was, and multiple things took place after that. And but I gotta tell you the concert experience.
Okay, the concert experience.
Can I tell you the concert experience?
Let's go back to the.
Okay.
Which concert is this?
This is Todd Agnew.
Okay, Todd Agnew.
So we come to know. I come to know the Lord. I knew I wanted to take my kids to a Christian church. I wanted to get my family involved, and so I'm Googling and Facebooking, and I find there's only one Christian church in the entire Sanpete County area at the time. There was a little Baptist church, but we're talking little, like 5 little women and a pastor. And I wanted something that my kids can enjoy. And so in Ephraim, about a half an hour away from us, there's a church called Ephraim Church of the Bible. And I'm like, I want to go meet with this pastor. I told Pastor Rodney that I remember telling him, I said, I'm Mormon, but not really. I know God. I had an experience this week. I want to meet with you. And he said, come meet me. And so I drove down there, and this was an amazing experience.
I think that's a great spot for us to end this episode. Perfect. And think about those conversations that you had with him and the trajectory that led you on.
And your viewers are going to have to wait for the concert story.
All right, guys, thanks for joining us here on the podcast. We are excited to hear Carl's story, and we're coming back with another episode so that you can experience the rest of that concert story. And there's so much more to this guy's life. We're excited to have you come back. We'll see you next time.
Thanks.